The young woman stood in the middle of the courtroom wearing a plain orange prison uniform. Her hands were cuffed in front of her, and her eyes stayed fixed on the wooden floor as if she had already accepted whatever fate was waiting for her. The room was quiet, but the silence was not kind. It was the kind of silence filled with judgment, whispers, and hidden smiles. People had already decided who she was, already decided she was guilty, already decided she was just another poor girl who had tried to do something she should not have done. The judge leaned back in his chair with the relaxed confidence of a man who had seen thousands of cases and believed he understood people within seconds. He glanced at the file in front of him and then looked up at her with a half smile that did not carry kindness. "Name?" he asked casually. The girl lifted her head slightly. Her voice was soft but steady. "Anna Petrova," she said quietly. The judge nodded slowly, flipping through the pages like someone skimming a boring story. "Fraud, identity theft, illegal access to financial systems," he read out loud, his voice filled with amusement rather than seriousness. The audience behind them murmured, some shaking their heads, others whispering to each other. Anna could feel every eye on her, but she did not turn around. She had already spent months learning what people thought when they looked at her. A poor immigrant girl with no family in the city, no expensive lawyer, and no powerful friends. To them the story was already finished. The judge looked up again and rested his chin on his hand, studying her face for a moment. "You understand the charges against you?" he asked. Anna nodded slowly. "Yes," she replied. The judge leaned forward slightly and tapped the file. "The evidence says you accessed an international banking network and transferred millions across multiple countries," he said, his tone light as if he was telling a joke. "That requires very advanced skills." He paused and then chuckled softly. "But according to this file, you work as a cleaner in a hotel." The courtroom laughed quietly. The judge raised an eyebrow and looked at her again. "So tell me, Miss Petrova, how does a hotel cleaner become an international cyber criminal?" Anna remained silent for a moment, her fingers gently tightening around the metal cuffs. She could feel the familiar weight of humiliation pressing against her chest, the same feeling she had carried since the day she was arrested, the same feeling she had felt when the police officers searched her small apartment and treated her like she was already a criminal. She slowly lifted her eyes toward the judge and spoke calmly. "I told the investigators the truth," she said quietly. "I speak 24 languages." For a second there was silence, and then the judge laughed out loud. It was not cruel laughter, but it was dismissive, the kind of laughter that powerful people use when they think someone beneath them has said something ridiculous. A few people in the audience laughed with him. The prosecutor shook his head with a small smile. The judge wiped a tear of laughter from his eye and leaned forward again. "You speak 24 languages," he repeated, still smiling. "That is impressive," he said sarcastically. "Perhaps you should add comedy to your talents." More quiet laughter spread across the courtroom. Anna did not react. She simply stood there, breathing slowly, waiting. The judge finally sighed and waved a hand. "All right, Miss Petrova, since today seems to be full of surprises, why don't you demonstrate one of these languages for us?" he said, clearly expecting nothing. Anna looked around the courtroom for the first time, her eyes briefly meeting the curious faces of strangers who had come to watch the case like entertainment. Then she looked back at the judge and spoke in calm, clear English. "Your Honor, the evidence file you are holding was translated incorrectly from 3 different languages." The judge blinked slightly, surprised by her fluent pronunciation. The prosecutor frowned. Anna continued without raising her voice. "The financial transaction logs came from servers in Germany, Japan, and Brazil," she said, "but the translations used during the investigation were done by automated software." The courtroom began to grow quieter. The judge slowly leaned forward, his smile fading just a little. Anna turned her head toward the prosecutor and spoke again, this time in perfect German, explaining a line from the report. Then she switched to Japanese, calmly repeating a technical term that had been mistranslated, then to Portuguese, correcting the interpretation of a transaction record. The air in the courtroom changed almost instantly. The small whispers disappeared. People leaned forward in their seats. The judge's expression slowly hardened as he realized the girl in front of him was not joking. Anna returned to English and spoke gently. "When these mistakes are corrected, the transactions do not point to me," she said. They point to someone else. The prosecutor quickly stood up, his face tense. Your Honor, this is highly irregular, he protested, but the judge raised his hand for silence. His eyes were now fixed on Anna with a completely different expression. Curiosity had replaced amusement. Continue, he said quietly. Anna nodded once. She then began explaining the sequence of transactions step by step, switching languages naturally whenever she quoted the original records: French, Spanish, Russian, Chinese, Italian, Korean, Arabic, each language flowing from her lips as calmly as the last. The courtroom sat frozen in disbelief. Even the court reporter had stopped typing for a moment before rushing to catch up. The judge leaned closer and closer to the desk as she spoke, his fingers slowly tightening together. The arrogance that had filled the room earlier was dissolving piece by piece. Anna's voice never became louder, never emotional. She simply explained, patiently, carefully, like someone who had spent months repeating the truth but had never been heard. Finally she stopped and looked directly at the judge again. The person responsible used a translation loophole to hide the origin of the transactions, she said softly, but they made one mistake. The judge's voice was now serious. What mistake? He asked. Anna looked toward the back of the courtroom where several observers were sitting. Her gaze stopped on a well-dressed man who had been watching silently since the beginning, a powerful businessman known in the city for his influence and wealth. The man shifted slightly in his seat. Anna spoke again. They forgot that language carries patterns, she said quietly. Accents, structures, cultural habits. The room felt colder somehow. Anna continued. The transaction notes contain phrasing that only appears in one regional dialect of Italian, she said. Then she turned her eyes back to the judge, and that dialect belongs to Mr. Lorenzo Bellini. The businessman suddenly stood up. This is absurd, he snapped angrily, but the courtroom was no longer laughing. The judge's face had turned pale with realization, because Lorenzo Bellini was not just a businessman, he was the largest donor to several political campaigns, a man who had shaken hands with judges and officials for years. The judge slowly looked down at the file again, then back at Anna. How long have you known this? He asked quietly. Anna lowered her eyes again for a moment, the sadness returning briefly to her expression. Since the first day of the investigation, she answered. The judge's voice softened slightly. Then why didn't you say it before? Anna hesitated, and for the first time a small crack of emotion appeared in her calm voice. Because no one listened, she said. The courtroom fell completely silent. The judge removed his glasses slowly and stared at the papers in front of him, then at the powerful man now standing stiffly near the back of the room. The balance of power that had seemed so clear at the beginning of the day had quietly shifted, and everyone in the room could feel it. The judge finally spoke again, his voice steady but different now. Miss Petrova, he said, would you be willing to demonstrate the rest of the evidence to the court? Anna nodded gently, and for the first time since the trial began, there was a small spark of quiet hope in her eyes, because patience had finally opened a door that humiliation never could, and in that silent courtroom, where laughter had once echoed, the truth was now beginning to speak.